Words Don't Do It Justice, brought to you by 314 Publishing and Imperial Dreams Productions. Don't forget to check out Words Don't Do It Justice at WDDIJcast. Words Don't Do It Justice, the last Monday of every month at 2:30. You're now live with the Words Don't Do It Justice monthly podcast. And this month's host, Rain.
Hi folks, this is Rain taking over the WDDIJ podcast for this month. I have some guests with me here to discuss some things that are very near and dear to my heart. So I'm just going to let them introduce themselves.
Yes, my name is Chris, and I'm from DC, and I'm here to talk about something that's important to me too, men's and women's rights, and, the reflection of how things get, how I feel about them and how my point of view is about it.
Okay, I'm Crystal, and as a woman, I guess I am talking about something near and dear to my heart as a woman and for other women in general.
I am Skye. I live in Atlanta, and I'm also here to talk about something that's important to me that I think that everybody should at least attempt to think about in their day-to-day life.
I'm Courtney. I'm here to discuss the issues that are important to me regarding Black femininity and also pretty much how I feel about feminism in general. So, yeah.
And as my guests basically just alluded, we are talking about women's rights, we're talking about men's rights, and then we're going to talk a little bit about feminism. That last part is going to go a little bit deeper than most people are used to. It's a little bit different because I think, hot button topic or not, it needs to be discussed. And with that, I guess we're going to take a break, and then we'll be right back with you.
Words Don't Do It Justice, brought to you by 314 Publishing and Imperial Dreams Productions. Don't forget to check out Words Don't Do It Justice at WDDIJ.com. Words Don't Do It Justice, the last Monday of every month at 2:30.
And we are back. So let's start with women's rights, people. I want to know where you stand in terms of basically today's climate, with the politicians always talking about the war on women, jobs and affirmative action and all dating. How do you feel about women's rights as it relates to basically how it is that we have to get along with each other in the world?
Well, I feel that women's rights are very important because I work for a government agency, which I'm not going to mention which one, but the ratio for hiring white males are a lot higher than women and women that are minorities. So they're trying to improve on that. But it's not going as smoothly as they would think. And I think that everyone that's not getting equal pay, especially with women's rights, I think everything should be equal across the board. And that I do think that there are some positions where there are some women that won't do certain jobs, maybe like construction and do heavy lifting, but may want the equal pay, but may not do the equal amount of work as a job. But that's just my opinion. And that's it for right now.
I pretty much feel like feminism is really important, especially nowadays. Not just about equality, but about identity. I think that feminism has allowed a lot of women to come to terms with their own identity, which is a good thing. But I also feel that there are some areas that could be improved as far as intersectionality and understanding how feminism is different for, women of color, or, whether you're disabled, or, people feeling like feminism has to be this very rigid box, or defining who should and should not be considered, a feminist. So I think it's a very important issue, and it's an interesting time to be putting these issues on the table.
I agree with Courtney. I think that just as a general rule, we should be working towards making people as equal as we can be, and that we should allow people to find a way of bringing about that change, because we can't do it alone. Nobody can do it on their own, and having the identity of somebody who is willing to bring about that change is important. And somebody who's willing to look and see that this is not fair, this is not equal, is the beginning of a big thing. And a lot of people get too much of a bad rap because you say that you want equal rights for women or whoever, but you aren't the ideal person or candidate for saying that such and such is equal. Because I know as a black male, the minute I say that I am a feminist or that I support feminism, I've been kicked out of feminist groups because I am a man. And I'm trying to help other people to get what I have / to help everybody get on the same level, but people are so segregated even in trying to get equality that things are, I don't know. I can't even think of where I was heading. Sorry.
That's okay. I think that you had a good point going there about being excluded just because you're a man. That's really interesting. Crystal, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's interesting, especially because even certain jobs are genderized, and like what Chris was saying earlier, that a lot of women don't get into construction, and that's because for years construction is considered as men's work, just like how recently a nurse is considered as being women's work. So that's why we have more women being pushed into nursing instead of being pushed into medical school. So, I think that when we stop genderizing work is when we'll start seeing more equality. It shouldn't be that this is a man's job or this is a woman's job. It should just be, this is a job, and if you are able-bodied enough to complete this work, it should be your job.
I agree wholeheartedly. And let's talk about this job thing, because right now we're still technically in that whole economic downturn situation where there are so many more employees available for working and so few jobs available to employ people in, supposedly. At least that's what they're always telling us, right? So how do we think that is being affected?
Well, I think the whole with so many jobs not being available, that because sometimes people want to send their stuff overseas because it's cheaper, and that sometimes the policies from different bills and stuff like that are just kind of affecting everything, I think. And I think that the more qualified people that are available... I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Can you come back to me?
Absolutely.
Okay, I just lost my train of thought.
It's okay, go ahead. Does anyone else have any thoughts about how it is that jobs are being affected by this women's rights thing?
Well, I think because women are more represented in the workforce currently, that certain things that were only attributed to women are now being attributed to men. So like parental leave, paid parental leave. When like, you know, I don't know if anybody watches a lot of sports, but when that baseball player took out paternity leave, everyone like got down his throat. And it's something that is his right to do as a father, just like how it's expected of a woman to stay home with a child. That those expectations play out in the workforce. And I think that changes the nature of how hiring practices are done. And it also changes the nature of how people work. We are doing hiring at my job right now. I work in academia, and I have to sit there and talk to new incoming faculty and trying to plan out their 5-year term before they come up for tenure, and just say, look, you know, within these 5 years or 6 years, you'll have time to take paid parental leave and all this other stuff. And I try to have that conversation with women as well as men. And again, some men are just like, whatever, that's, you know, I'm not staying home, but others are more into it. So I think that changes the nature of how people look for jobs, because younger people, younger women and men who come into academia, they look at the tenure clock as a way, can I do family planning? And if they can't, they may not go to institution A and settle for institution B, where they get less money, but they'll have more flexibility in family planning. So those type of things play out within the workforce. So that could affect the choosing of jobs as well as hiring practices for some employers who want to get people who aren't going to leave and take maternity leave or paternity leave.
You know, that used to actually be a factor in how people would or wouldn't get hired. Let's say used to, and that's not true. It actually probably still is a lot like how race is still a factor in how people get hired, fired, or whatever, promoted. But it used to be more public, where the thought was, well, you know, Sally, you are probably going to get married and have a baby. And when you do that, you're not going to be able to work. So we're just going to not pay you the same, or we're just going to not hire you at all. Okay? Great. Thanks so much. That's basically how it used to be. And yeah, it's great that supposedly we're not doing that anymore. But the fact that they're not saying it up front doesn't mean that it's not happening. Right? So in terms of, still, we're talking about this whole job situation, right? We all know, at least we should at least by now know, that there's a serious situation going on with the hiring and firing of people, because right now it's an employer's market. And there are so many incentives for employers to hire, let's say, women, and let's say women of color, whatever color that might be. And then we can add on the let's hire some gay women while we're at it. There are so many incentives for hiring minorities. But the problem has also become that it's not even just last hired, first fired. It's also, well, we met the quota when we needed to. Now we can just hire who we really want. Is anybody have any insight or experience or anything like that?
Well, I do, like in the public institution academic perspective, we do have like goals. They're not really quotas. They're more like goals. And there's a diversity and equity office, and sometimes they set out goals. They're like, look, your department has not hired minorities in a long time. So, you guys need to set up a goal to hire a minority or women or something. And typically they settle for women mostly because talented minorities don't want to come to a public institution. So they just go with women, and the women tend not to be racial or underrepresented minorities. And depending on what field will depend on where you're under or overrepresented. So Africana Studies Department will be overrepresented of Black, Hispanic, Latinos, but they won't have white people who study African history because they're not part of the job search. So, it's one of those type of things that they do. And once they fill that goal set by the diversity office, they just go back and hire whoever they want. So you'll see in some departments, there's an overrepresented group. So in the computer science department in the institution I work in, it's an overrepresentation of Hasidic Jews, where in the biology department, it's an overrepresentation of white males. So it actually, and in other departments, like in the women's studies department, there are no men. So it really depends.
Skye, what is your experience with all of this?
In general, I don't see as much of the minority hiring experience, but I also live in an area where minorities are more present, seeing as I'm in Atlanta. But as I've gone out, there are definitely restaurants and more higher end places further out of the perimeter where there are less minority people, where you can tell that they have their token Asian or
Courtney,
token black guy or the token woman who's working there just because they need to make sure that they're hiring people equally. And it's a shame when you can tell that they only have certain type of employees hired because it's on a checklist for them to do. But to the most part, I've never worked at a job where it has been as big an issue. But most of the jobs I've worked at have been either doing human rights activism or other forms of activism, and they tend to be more accepting and more willing to hire whoever is willing to work for the cause.
Well, for the past few years, I've mainly worked freelance, but I have noticed just from the past couple of jobs, like, working in marketing and graphics, that there are a lot of women present in that industry. And I guess, I guess I don't see it as much from my perspective, but I do agree that that just being out and around other people, there's definitely like this tokenism there. And like, for example, hiring a Black woman, it kind of helps them cross two things off of their, list of their list of whatever they want to cover diversity wise. Sorry, I'm getting like all flustered, but yeah, I do wish that, instead of there, just being these quotas or, let me just hire this one or two minorities, that there definitely was more representation of different groups of people. And I think it just depends too on what industry you're in, because of course there's no surprise that in a women's studies department that there aren't a lot of men present, or at an Africana studies department that there is is predominantly Black. But I mean, at least here at my institution, there actually are a few white professors who teach Africana studies, and my ex-roommate, he received his degree in Africana studies, and that was like a big difference for him coming from South Florida, where it was actually, no, I'm sorry, I have it wrong. Up here, it was more like Black people, representing the Africana Studies department, but down south, he said that there were more white professors, and that the view on Africana Studies was completely different, and it really affected how he learned in that program, and he felt that he got a lot more out of it because it wasn't coming from such a rigid perspective of just these Black professors. So I do think that it's valuable for just different industries to start opening their doors more. Even if these industries are identified, for particular groups like women's studies or whatever.
I'm just getting a feel for how everybody works and what everybody does. It looks like, or sounds like, what the experience is just that there is a situation, right? There is a situation, there is a disparity, and it isn't as much as I would have thought in women's favor, because at least where I am, and almost every job that I've ever had has just been blanketed with women everywhere. I mean, usually there are like 9 women to every 1 guy. And at least in my purview, I was always thinking that maybe it's because right now men aren't given the incentive as much as women are to work. But maybe I've just been pushed into those situations, I guess. So I guess my next question is, do you think that there needs to be a change?
I think definitely there needs to be a change because nothing is equal. And at my job, if someone wants to get, someone in the higher ups wants someone to get hired, like their niece, nephew, or something like that, no matter what race they are, they'll get hired. And it's just kind of unfair that other people that are equally have the same degrees and same education can't get those jobs in a more of a what I'm looking for, in a more fair environment. And I think that if we change a lot of policies and just try to have everyone apply equally and have the same type of rights, I think everything would be okay. But there needs to be a big change so everyone can at least get a fair chance at a job, and it could be the same amount of minorities or whoever that wants to be hired.
That's pretty cut and dry. I definitely agree completely. Where do you stand, Courtney?
I think the issue is not just in policy. At the end of the day, there's, the human factor. And, if I am a white male, hiring people that I want to work for me, people want to hire people that they want to work with, in a sense. It's very personal at the end of the day. And not to say that that's an excuse. I definitely don't believe that's an excuse, but I do feel like that plays a role in how difficult it is for women and minorities to get into certain, what's the word that I'm looking for? Just to make certain connections and get into certain arenas. It's really breaking this social barrier that, policy can't always overcome, because with policy, we see what happens, that, people will do the bare minimum, but people aren't really being pushed outside of policy to really see women and minorities as capable. They're seeing, women and minorities is just necessary to fulfill whatever requirements they have to fulfill. So, and it's kind of difficult, of course, because, when it comes to changing people's minds and beliefs, that's quite a chore. But I do feel like at the root of it all, that is what's going to hinder and block true equality, even with particular policies in place. Because what can you do? Are you going to say, well, you need to make sure that a company has 2 Asians, 3 Blacks, and make sure that, at least, half of the people there are women? Like, are we going to get that specific with it just to make sure that there's equal rights for everyone? So I do believe in equality, but I just feel like it's something that's gonna go far beyond just, binding people's hands to make them higher. Because there's always gonna, be this way around.
Where do you stand, Crystal?
Well, I agree with Courtney. I think it is important in terms of mandating exposure, because the thing is, she's right, people go with what they know, what they're comfortable with, and what they see. And if they're not exposed to different people, they will only want what they've been exposed to around them. I mean, I think that for a while that we should mandate, I don't want to say quotas, but I'll go with goals because it's a lot nicer. But I think that we should, until things are equal, we should mandate equity. So just say, look, things aren't equal right now. Everybody's not on the same footing, but let's at least have a way for things to become equal in the future by saying, okay, we're going to hire XYZ amount of people to give the people that we're used to exposure to new faces. And once they're exposed to that, it will start to trickle down, and soon you won't have to mandate these things anymore. So, I don't know.
Well, clearly you do know, but I think on the one hand, I've always been really torn, and I actually wrote a blog on this. It started this way a couple weeks ago. I'm really torn on that whole thing because we're basically talking about the affirmative action, and I'm not going to say that it hasn't served us, because it has, but at the same time, I want to know that the reason why I got the job is because I actually got the job. My resume, my efforts, my expertise is actually what it is that they're hiring, not, it's a chick, and it's a black one. Great, we'll take her. That's not how I want this to go. I didn't spend the years in college just so that this, my ovaries and my skin tone will get me a job. That's not what I went through all that for. So it's like, I'm torn, because at the same time, the judgment is being made long before they even get to necessarily see me. Once they find out, it's a chick and she's black, they can also be making the decision of why it is that they don't want to hire me, just because of those things. So it really is a double-edged sword. But I digress. Skye, what's your thoughts on it?
I think that the fact that we have mandates that say you have to hire such and such amount of people in this minority or that minority is a start. The problem is that the problem I have is that you can find cases where people take what they have to do and view that as all that's necessary and don't try to actually interview applicants based off their skill. They see, oh, look, this is a black woman. We don't have a black or a woman. This would take up 2 parts of our quota. And they don't actually think of it as a way to, they don't think of it as a reason to integrate people. And what we need is I wish there was a way that we could better encourage people to integrate different races, different types of people into a job. But as of yet, I can't visualize any method that will work, because if you make any kind of situation where you tell people that they have to have this much stuff or they have to do this or that, many companies that are contrary to that mindset are just going to do the bare minimum and not think of it as a way of expanding or improving upon their company. And that's a shame.
Yeah, it is. It really is. I can't even say anything to that. You hit it. What can I say? I'm sorry.
Hey, can I ask a question?
Oh, certainly.
Okay. So I know you said that they would hire you just because you're black and you're a woman, and if you really did your job, do you have enough? I'll just ask this question for everybody. Do you have enough pride that you wouldn't take the job because they hired you because you're black or a woman or black and a man?
It depends on how much they paying. I'm gonna be honest.
You know what? I can't even be mad at you. Listen, when it comes down to it, of course, listen, I'm going to take the job. Yes, I'm going to take the job. Especially if it's like, we're going to pay you $80,000 a year to just be the token black girl, then yes, I will take that and I will dance to work every day. That is what it is. Especially if I don't actually have to do any work while I'm doing it. Yes, I'm taking that job. But, Courtney, where do you stand on it?
Going back to what Crystal was saying, it just kind of reminded me of my experience when I was a graphic designer at a public university. And the environment, it was predominantly white. There were a lot of women, and there were a couple of us women of color, but I do feel like, there was a shift in how I was treated when I began to, I don't want to use the term congregate, but when I began associating with the other black women in the office, that my boss began to treat me differently. And I feel like, that's why you have okay, we're going to hire, this black woman, but we don't want too many of the same kind, because then, it kind of becomes, I don't want to use the term threat, but I just feel like people become uncomfortable with it.
But that is the proper word to use.
Yeah, it becomes, even though we're all smart, we're black women, but we're all smart. We all do our jobs well and everything. It just becomes like, they feel left out. And it's not anything that was done on purpose or anything, but there was this tension even before I came into the office between, the black women there and the rest. I mean, there was a couple of other white people that hung out with these particular women, but overall, especially in my department, my boss and my coworker and everything, they began to definitely treat me differently, and I feel like that plays a role in hiring, multiple minorities or multiple women or women of colors, that this fear of community and how that's going to affect them, especially if you're used to being in the majority in whatever way it is.
Well, I don't know, maybe because I have a warrior spirit, but I feel like you should threaten them. I don't mind if they're scared. I guess because of my work experience, I've always had to fight. So even for my first job working in an ice cream store, there were only guys that worked there. I was the first girl to get the job. And people wouldn't want to get served by me because I was a girl, because it's not soft serve ice cream. So they're just like, oh no, you're not strong enough. And so even going forth and working in a public institution where I am the youngest and the darkest woman on my level, and I made a lot of people uncomfortable and scared on my way up, because not only was I ferocious in my rise to the top, but I didn't apologize for it. So, yeah, I mean, I think they should be scared. I think they should be uncomfortable. I think that they should have some type of emotional reaction to that, like, to you. They're not used to you, so they should feel some type of way. And if it's scared, then hey.
Yeah, I don't know if, in my case, like, I don't know if they were, I almost want to feel like it was like this sort of jealousy, because like when I started out, my boss was really friendly with me, and, she told me personal details about herself. And then as I became close, and, she, kind of, I don't know, like she just kind of changed after I started associating with the other woman who was Black. And they both were kind of, she was my boss, but they didn't have to answer to each other though. So it was just like, she became, kind of belittling, and she even sabotaged my work, as far as the clients that I was working with, like the projects that I was assigned and everything, sabotaging the work so that clients weren't even getting the things that I was sending them. It just became very, like the things that were done became like they were just doing a lot of underhanded stuff. And not even to me, at some point it started to even happen to the woman I was associating with, and so well, that was my first time experiencing something like that so blatantly. In the past I had worked in engineering firms where it's predominantly white males, and at the time I was young, and so of course they kind of treated me as such. But I mean, at the end of the day, they gave me a job and they expected me to do it. It wasn't anything personal like this. So yeah, it just, office politics can get really interesting in regards to, especially with color.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where you have to stand your ground, because if you're any form of minority, or if you're at all different from the other people working with you and they are willing to look at you differently, then you're going to have to stand your ground to make sure they realize I am here because I am a competent employee. I do my job and I do it just as well, if not better than the rest of you. And once they get that into their heads, they pay less attention to the fact that you're gay or that you are a woman or that you're Black or whatever it is that makes you different. And they're more likely to respect you and try to work with you as a person, unless they're just severely, utterly bigoted, in which case you have bigger problems.
Well, I mean, the thing is that they're going to always be scared. Well, I don't know. I guess maybe that's how they view me, that they're nervous and they get a little scared. And like, just like any wild animal, they either want to run or fight you. And typically they try to fight me, but I win. So it's you have to be tough, and you have to know, especially depending on where you're going to work, and if where you're going to work is going to be male dominated, you have to be better. If where you're going to work is going to be white dominated, you have to be the best. So, I mean, and if it's white male dominated, you gotta be tough and the best. So it's one of those things where, I guess, you know, I don't know. I'm always ready to fight. So it kind of ends up being, you know, me, this one person army against a bunch of people. And eventually I win because I'm not going to stop. Not because it makes them uncomfortable or because of anything else. So.
Yeah, your story reminds me of a close friend of mine. She works in the corporate world for a HR firm, and I mean, she's done very well for herself. I would say that her experience in corporate is probably an exception because she started out as a temp worker on the phone 4 years ago, and even without her degree, she's worked herself up to a corporate trainer. And so, I mean, she's the only one representing that department in the whole U.S. And so she reports directly to the vice president, and her colleagues have at least 10 years experience in a master's degree, and she has 4 years experience and no degree. And I like, just in conversations that we've had, like, she always is teaching me how to navigate the corporate world and everything, and how much better she has to be, how much more thorough she has to be, how mindful she has to be of being able to do her job and assert herself, but not be considered the angry black woman. You know, understanding that she cannot assert herself in the same way as a white woman could without being viewed in the lens of violence and being seen as hostile. So it's, you know, very, just from the story she's told me, it's just very interesting how she's learned to navigate this world. And has obviously been very successful in how she does it, but it's just, that's why, I guess going back to how feminism plays a role, I think that's why feminism is important in bringing these issues to the forefront, because at the end of the day, you know, it shouldn't be that way. You know, she should be able to voice her concerns and do her job, you know, without having to resort to these extra strategies and tactics that her coworkers don't even have to think about just because of her skin color or because of her gender. And she's definitely faced her fair amount of race and gender issues working with the people that she's worked with. So,
you know, I'm going to chime in here because I think I need to redefine something, or maybe get you guys to redefine it for me. I consider women's rights to be completely separate from feminism. Let me explain. Okay. Women's rights is what feminists are usually fighting for. And I say usually because we've all met the few extremists, I'm going to use that word, who kind of give some of us feminists a bad name. Okay? So women's rights is a thing, feminists are a group of people, feminism is a movement, so forth and so on. But women's rights in and of itself is a completely separate thing in that it's kind of like there should be a Bill of Rights. Well, there is a Bill of Rights, and women should be included on it, but most of the time, when you really look at it, all they're talking about is men and what men can do and what men have the right to do, man this, men that, and it's really blatant, at least on a historical sense, that what they really meant was men can do this, and if you don't count as a man, that's the racial aspect of it, if you don't count as a man, then you don't have the right to do this. So we had to come in and start saying, no, women have rights too. For example, we have the right to speak up for ourselves. We have the right to own our own property. Oh, and by the way, our bodies. We have the right to have a say in what it is that we actually want to do with our lives. We have a right to an education. We have rights. And then we had to come up with, now, how is it that we are going to fight for these rights? That's when feminism came in. So I'm making this distinction specifically because, like I said before, we're going to talk about feminism. But I really want to focus on the rights aspect of it, because the next subject is going to be men's rights. And there is no manism. there's no movement for them. So, but let me get your definition, if you have one, of women's rights versus feminism. Chris? Sorry, wrong Chris. Crystal, because she called it first.
Okay. What I was thinking is, instead of calling it women's rights, because I feel like it excludes some of the other people on the fringes, that, like, people who are intersexual or things like that. I would think that we should probably redefine personhood, because, I mean, like, they think personhood as fetal rights, but I'm just like, screw that. How about the right of a person? Just period, a person. It doesn't matter what type of person you are. You can be male, female, somewhere in between, whatever. But I think that, you know, if we as people all had equal rights, and equal rights to our bodies and equal rights to our minds, then maybe we wouldn't have this problem. So, like, you know, I'm just stepping out of the box of the word of feminism and women's rights, but just like my definition of what personhood should be, I think would probably work better for all of us.
Okay, I will accept that as a fact, because you're right. It is not inclusive, but I kind of like the specificity of women's rights, because I can't. I shouldn't say I can't, because I can, but it's easier as a woman to be able to speak from my actual perspective, my actual experiences. I don't have actual experiences as somewhere in betweenish kind of person, but you are correct. So persons' rights should also be a thing, and I guess they are. But I've also been corrected. Apparently there is the Men Going Their Own Way and men's rights association or what have you that is fighting for men's rights. So I stand corrected. But Chris, male Chris, you actually had something to say?
Yes. With women's rights, I just think I was agreeing with Crystal that it should be a person thing than rather just all women. I mean, just women, but everyone should have the same rights, even if they are, I guess, the gender, transgender. But that's a whole other topic between transgender and the 51 different things they could be, but that's another subject. But I think that this rights is something that everyone should focus on for women and men, and that it should just be equal. But and with feminism, other than the extremists, which ruin it for everybody, and
they sure do.
It kind of, I don't know, like when I first started reading about it, it was more or less just, I did not want to, I don't really support feminism until I started hearing the less extreme people, and I was like, okay, now it's the actual point of feminism for the rights, and I do support that.
For me, the difference between feminism and women's rights is that women's rights is just the feminine half of the general human rights activism, and that we all have rights that we should have as people, and feminism is the attempt to get those rights settled out. It's over time it has evolved so that there are other movements within that, like lesbian feminism, which more instead of focusing on the rights women have, is more focused on the right women have to relationships with other women. And then there's radical feminism that shows that women can be more powerful than men at times. But in general, women's rights are the basic rights any human should have that women feel as though they don't have at this time. Whereas feminism is usually people trying to fight for those rights, or people trying to argue that they should have those rights, which is something that gets lost as it gets super extreme, but isn't completely lost. It's just more mutilated into more of a form of power rather than a form of rights and equality.
Well, I guess, I mean, we're all on the same page, so that's good. I guess we can kind of go with that. Courtney, did you have anything to add?
I agree pretty much with how Skye described women's rights, as far as being, just a branch of human rights. It, was born out of women wanting the right to vote and own property and pretty much be afforded the same rights that every adult human being, should be afforded as per our Constitution, or whatever country you're from, whatever those rights are is not just extended towards a particular group of people, but I feel like feminism is about identity, and it's a lot more complex than just rights. It's about how we identify ourselves, how we are represented, and how we respond to that representation of us. And, just the freedoms, to be who we want to be. So I feel like feminism tackles more, I feel like people see feminism as this whole man versus woman thing, or, yes. And it's not about men versus women. I feel it's just about women having the right to identify as whatever type of woman they want to, because I don't feel like, a woman, like for me, I feel like women should have right to body autonomy, and as far as sexuality goes, I feel like a woman should have the right to be asexual or be as hypersexual as she wants to be. That's her decision, but either way, whether you are more conservative or more liberal as far as your role as a woman, that you have the right to be that person and not be boxed into a particular view or representation of what a woman should be, quote unquote, identified as. And I feel like that's what feminism is about, rather than, as opposed to women's rights.
And on that note, I think it is time we took a break. Thanks, guys. We're going to come back with men's rights. That's coming up next.
Why, hello, Jimmy. Why the long face?
Well, Mr. Johnny Balsa, sir, I'm a little sad because I need more radio drama in my life.
Huh? That's so. Let me ask you something, Jimbo. Do you like starships?
Well, yeah, they're cool.
What about space mercenaries?
Oh, yeah, I love those guys.
Do you love space battles in galactic space?
Oh my god, yes, I love it!
Do you like blasting off into space, Jimmy?
Oh my god, yes! Yes, please, I want to blast off! Yeah.
Jimmy, are you ready to join Team Star Fox in space?
Oh my goodness, Mr. Balsley, yes! I want to join the Star Fox team and blast off into galactic war space!
Then tune in to Project Zion's G Diffuser 01.
Brought to you by WDDIJcast Radio.
What is good? It's your friendly neighborhood nerd, the Bobo, and if you're looking for a place to kind of kick up your feet and get a little news, some reviews, talk to some interesting people, and a whole lot of laughs, then come kick it with me and my crew, here on Bobo's Block. We do it for the nerds, freaks, and geeks alike. Heck, even for the geeks in training. So, let's have a block party, people. Bobo's Block, only on WDDIJcast Radio Network.
on, everybody? It's your girl Saki. I'm chilling with my sisters Tinchi and Mako, and we're here to give you the 411 on our new show, Nexus Gen Radio.
That's right. After Dark Radio is now the new and improved Nexus Gen Radio. We're still bringing you the hottest topics, steaming stories, smooth poetry, and latest news.
So do us a favor and catch us on Facebook.com/Nexus Gen Radio. We'll see you guys there.
The sun had begun to set. The man walks onto his porch and stares off onto the horizon. There is a cool, comforting breeze. The man stretches his arms out wide and stands on his tippy toes. Suddenly, the air gets still. The sun disappears behind dark clouds, and a shadowy figure approaches the man from a ways off in the distance. The man becomes uneasy. He peers around, trying to see if anyone else notices the stranger approaching. The man begins to sweat. His hands shake, and he feels a little faint.
Please, I can't decide,
he finally says, wiping the sweat from his brow. The shadowy figure stops a few yards away. It stands perfectly still. Doesn't move. If you can't decide, you should listen to Screen Visions Radio.
Huh?
Desmond Childs breaks down everything you could possibly want to know about movies. He'll help you decide.
Oh, wow.
But you better train.
Train?
He mostly reviews Asian films and has marathons and such. So practice your kung fu. You may need it. Screen Visions Movie Blog Podcast is a show about my journey through the world of Asian cinema. I sometimes dabble in other films, but I always cover what's going on in Hollywood, Bollywood, or wherever the latest stories are breaking. So do yourself a favor and tune in. I'll be waiting. Then we can decide on what movie you want to watch. Screen Visions Radio, a proud member of the WDDIJcast Radio Network.
Hey guys, what's up? This is DJ Horace of Wise Guy Jukebox, also known as the Almighty Bird Chest or the Chill Eagle with the headphones. If you're interested in listening, talking, or discussing all things music involving an assortment of topics, check out the show. Won't hurt till you try it. Also check out my album reviews at wiseguyjukebox.wordpress.com or like my Facebook page for weekly jams at facebook.com/wiseguyjukebox. Other than that, stay slick. I'll catch you guys later.
Men's rights. So, like I said in the intro, this is also a topic that is near and dear to my heart because I think men are people too. And men have rights. And we should be protecting men's rights, especially in an age where everybody has a voice. And sometimes, you know what, the voice of the majority also gets drowned out, sometimes to the point where they're being neglected too. So I want to talk about men's rights. I want to talk about what it is that we see, how it is that we experience men's rights and equality and, of course, socially, politically, just walking down the street. Tell our listeners, what's your experience in terms of men's rights? Where do you stand on the issue?
Well, and for men's rights, for me, there's a lot of things that we can't do morally, and it's because women are seen as weaker. And we can take it from like the Jay-Z and Solange situation where Solange was kicking the mess out of him for whatever reason, no, and all that. But he didn't hit her. Now, if he would have hit her, he would have been seen as wrong. But at the same time, socially, people are saying, why didn't he hit her? He should have been defending himself.
You know,
and then you get the other side.
Why didn't Beyonce do something? Because that's her sister. But I digress. You were saying?
And then, you know, like the whole Chris Brown situation where he beat Rihanna and everybody's like, oh, that's wrong. People don't want Chris Brown to beat on Rihanna, but people want Jay-Z to defend himself and hit Solange. What do we, as men, what do we do? I mean, myself, I would hold her down, until she calms down. I won't try to walk away from it. But if I hit her or do anything like that, I'll go to jail for defending myself. And socially, people be like, oh, well, he hit her. Obviously, he was in the wrong because she's weaker and he's a man and he's stronger. But I think men's rights definitely need to go along those lines of what can we do when women attack us? And when men do, most men don't report getting hit by their wives because they think they're going to get laughed at because of whatever reason. And usually police side with the women anyway, and they end up getting arrested anyway, which happened to a cousin of mine. And I'd like to hear what everybody else has to say about this.
I'm sorry.
No, sorry, Courtney. No, I was just gonna say that those type of double standards, I think they're unfair because what if like Solange was built like Xena Warrior Princess? Then him not hitting her back, oh, well, she's a woman, but she's Xena Warrior Princess. Like, what? He can take it. And, she can take it, and I swear, like, yo, fight back. I don't think men shouldn't have the ability to not fight back. I don't know. I grew up with a lot of male cousins and being, like, the first girl after 9 boys. I used to get beat up, and it was one of those things that you either cry or you fight back. And, like, I learned that not all men will be nice, and not all men won't hit you back. So if you go and punch somebody, you better be able to take a punch, too. So, I don't know. That's just my take on it.
Courtney, you had something to say?
Pretty much piggybacking off of what they said. I think it just kind of comes down to like with the way gender roles have changed and kind of like what we discussed during break. I think it's a identity thing even for men where the same things that used to define manhood no longer are necessary for our survival per se. Because like if you think about ancient times, that I think, well, at least from what I've learned, that was like the only time that it was anything remotely close to a matriarchal society where women were reverenced for their ability to procreate, and men saw women as needing of protection, not necessarily because they were just weak, but because of their ability to bear children. It was seen as something divine and something to be reverenced and protected. And so our roles as men and women in this world kind of evolved from that. And I think now, in modern times, we're at this point where like dealing with issues of abuse and violence that men have not necessarily been taught how to deal with that on the receiving end because of these ideas of what masculinity means and how men should deal with violence and everything. It's about protecting the woman, but it's also like about preserving who you are as a man, because what man wants to admit defeat by a woman. And I think that that's an issue when men can't voice that they are hurt or abused or afraid. And so I think it's good that we have men with, as far as men's rights go, I think that it's a good thing that we're now able to directly address those issues with how men are brought up. Because I feel like men are taught that anything that is feminine is weak, like feelings that's associated with being feminine. So if you are sharing, if you're having emotions about certain things that, or at least like certain feminine identified emotions, that makes you a weak man. That if you are expressing emotions, you express it with your brothers, which is, I feel like, why you see this whole trend with the strength of brotherhood in society with men. Like, they share their emotions with each other and not necessarily with women until, you know, the past century, I guess you could say. So I guess that's where I stand with men's rights. Like, I feel like it's an important issue. I do feel like men, should recognize that they still have privilege in a patriarchal society, but also at the same time, like you said, that their voice shouldn't be completely drowned out by feminism to the point where we can't recognize how this change in tide is affecting them, you know, on a complex level as a human being, you know. So sorry, I know that was a mouthful.
No apologies needed. I want to talk about that. Not the apology part, but you said something that I always think about when I'm speaking or when I'm trying to relay my thoughts, and it's actually one of those habits that was really hard for me to break. And public speaking professor pointed it out that women, when we speak and we're expressing ourselves, tend to use the word feel. And when men speak or are expressing themselves, they say think. And the big example that this professor used was that, quote, "I think, therefore I am." It's not I feel, therefore I am. It's I think, therefore I am. And the reason why that's so important, of course, is because for a very long period of history, women were not. We were barely in existence. And let's not even talk about whether we existed as Black women, because we were the last on the list to get acknowledgement. So we definitely were not. And men are taught or trained or, you know, nature versus nurtured into thinking things through. And we are taught, trained, nature versus nurtured into feeling our way through. And it in a lot of ways, it's really destructive. And one of the things that can change our perception of each other is when we change the words that we use. So, you know, I made that conscious decision to not say I'm feeling something unless I'm actually talking about an emotion. Otherwise, I'm thinking. I am thinking, I am being, I am claiming my existence, is the way how this professor explained it to me. Now, I keep saying this professor specifically because I didn't want to also say that this professor was a woman, a white woman, who wanted to make sure that I understood that it was important to claim my personhood in my language. As someone who was always had diction and, you know, proper English, if that's what you want to call it, those things have always been really important in all of my upbringing. People have, for whatever reason, always recognized that. And so she took it upon herself to really make sure that I understood the importance of the words that I chose to use at any given point in time, especially when I was speaking to others and trying to convey my thoughts. To say that I feel something, it instantly makes people count it as less valid. When you say that you're thinking something, it automatically means that they should be thinking about it too. Anyway, I just wanted to share that. Did anybody else have any thoughts on this?
I guess this sort of cycles back to what I believe it was Crystal was saying. Can't remember who was talking before you. But I think Courtney, sorry. One of the issues is that we're now being taught more often to treat men and women as equals, but we're not taught to treat masculinity and femininity as equal. So you see a lot of downplaying femininity in any community. Whether you're straight, men will tend to downplay feminine men, whether they're gay or not. You tend to look better, you look harder at a woman who portrays herself more what people say is quote unquote masculine and aggressive than women who are more quote unquote feminine and submissive and emotional. We still don't quite put masculine and feminine on the same term. So when we look at men and women, we might look at a man and a woman as equal, but we won't look at the masculinity and the femininity as equal. So we aren't actually seeing equality. We're doing like this false level of equality when we talk about people.
Yes. Preach. I wish I had a tambourine right now. Because that's exactly one of the problems that I find, especially when we're talking about men's rights, is the way how femininity is, I guess, it's like a weight that gets slapped onto a guy who isn't a jerk, who treats people with respect, especially if he treats his woman with respect, or if he actually, wants to be a good boyfriend, husband, lover, whatever his role is. It's those quote unquote feminine traits are bestowed upon any given man who doesn't do those things that are not, well, I guess they are socially acceptable, which is also a problem. But Courtney, did you have some insight on this?
I just kind of lost my thought, but overall, I was shaking my tambourine too, because I do think that there's this hierarchy of emotion, and like Chris was saying before. Was that Chris talking before?
That was Skye.
Skye. Okay. Yeah, that there's this hierarchy of emotion, and that those things that are masculine are kind of like you were saying too about the whole feel versus think, that or even the stereotype that men, it kind of goes along with the stereotype that men deal in logic and women deal in emotion, as if those things are two completely separate things, and that feeling something is what's the word that I'm looking for? Inferior, or it's not the word I'm looking for, but that feelings are inferior to logic. And like you said, since men can say that they think something, that, that whole idea of whatever they're thinking kind of trumps how, someone else is feeling. And I think that we kind of get rid of these ideas of masculine and feminine traits and realize that these are all human traits. Then we can kind of start to see each other as not just equals, but just as complex individuals. And, I guess it should be the same thing for men. If a man wants to sleep around, if a man is more expressive with his sexuality, he should not, catch flack for it, nor be overly praised for it, just as well as a man who desires to be more reserved with his sexuality shouldn't, catch flack for it either. Or these whole ideas of what, like the means with, a real man should do this and a real man would be that, just getting rid of these ideas and pressures and just allowing men to be human beings instead of having to live up to these ideas of what they think they should be as a man, because there's a lot of, suppressing going on. And I think, with femininity, it's helped kind of, bring these issues to the forefront, but it feels more like a battle when it should be like something that we're working together, because at the end of the day, we essentially have the same goals where we're trying to help people reshape their own identity and kind of claim that their personhood and their identity for themselves in whatever way it manifests.
I definitely agree with that, because a lot of times when things are downplayed on a social level, especially, when a guy is basically telling another guy, your manhood is in question, because it really makes things difficult for men to be able to really assert themselves, because a lot of times, at least on a psychological level, or so I've been told, and you guys can jump in whenever you want to on this, because you guys are actually guys, meaning Skye and Chris. A lot of times, from my understanding, from the male perspective, you are often validated only by other men. So when another man is calling into question your masculinity or the validity of your masculinity, or, whether you're getting your man card taken away, it's a big deal, and it can really do some real damage to, starting with a young boy, but also with a man in how he relates to the world around him. But yeah, so here's a question. What do you think about the legal disadvantages that men are, that men encounter when it comes to domestic relationships and, family, in terms of, specifically speaking, like the legal end of it, where guys don't really necessarily get to claim custody of the kids and things like that? What about that in terms of men's rights?
Well, when my son was born and everything, at the hospital, they put me and my girlfriend aren't married yet, but they put her last name on everything. Even when he was born, even though his last name was going to be mine, they put her last name on everything, and I have to sign something for parentage. And even though, like, even now, online there's like stuff that says Libby, that's her last name. So my last name. So I kind of felt kind of a certain way that, they was all catering to her. I know she carried the baby for 9 months and everything. And that's fine, I understand that. But, once I didn't get a chance to really fill out any of this information, and they didn't really need or ask me for my opinion on a lot of things as a man. And that kind of felt kind of like, well, I've been here these 9 months, there's not a lot of men that do that. And when it comes to, like, legal and, I guess, when it comes to separation, usually the woman gets the kids, unless she's on drugs or something like that. 99% of the time, it's harder for men to get the kids than for the women. And for some reason, Pardon?
I said, or visitation rights.
Yeah, it's way harder for men to even get kids or anything like that. And that's one thing that needs to be worked on. And even if the man is providing all the money, everything, clothes, he still can't get custody for some reason. And I've always wondered why the court system was biased in that way.
I could probably go in pretty deep on that, because, as an aspiring lawyer, I did have to take a class or two on that. And I found that it was really disgusting because basically the message that's being taught is that a child needs its mother, as if that's basically where it ends. And that does not, that just doesn't help, really. It doesn't help in terms of so-called family values or anything like that. But it's it really does. It has a lot. It's really involved, and I guess that's kind of a subject for a whole nother podcast, really, because I mean, I actually blogged on this also before, because it like I said, this is a subject that's very near and dear to my heart. And when it comes to things like men actually being able to have their own voice in their relationships and have their own voice with their children, that is being severely diminished by, I guess, the proponents for women's rights and feminism. But did anyone else have any thoughts?
Well, I just had one more thing, one more point to make real quick. Someone else want to talk?
We're listening.
Okay, well, when my son was born and everything, we didn't sign up for WIC right away. And we didn't get his birth certificate and everything first. So, as a WIC is for women, infants, and children, I try to sign up, one of my days off, but I have to bring the mother, if we're together, or if we're even not together, we have to bring the mother. And there's no way to sign up without her, which kind of felt like, what if she was, in the hospital or something like that, she couldn't come, or she was just being stingy and didn't want to come down there and help me take care of the baby. How would I be able to sign up for WIC? And it was just only way we was able to do that if she came down there with the baby or with the proper documentation and everything was under her name. And unless I had a piece of paper that's saying I'm the father, there was nothing I could really do at all.
That's really, like I said, it just really gets my gall about that whole kind of situation. As far as the lack of respect, I guess, is really what I would want to have to say. It's a lack of respect when it comes down to a father who is actually trying to do the right thing, whether he's actually being allowed or encouraged to do so. But Crystal.
What I wanted to say about that, I think that WIC and other programs like that were created in response to fatherless children and to help address the single mother parentage that has been common, like, in American society. But what it also does, like how these programs are set up, it discourages fathers to take responsibility for their children, because it's set up in a way that even if, say, like, God forbid, your girlfriend died giving birth to your child, you would have no help, because all those programs are set up for fatherless children and not motherless children. Like, even like, they have societies for motherless children, but then I don't see like, where it's important that a child's mother has died, but not so much as important that their father has died. And I think it is due to the fact that we have genderized the role of nurturing kids from birth to adulthood to a woman's role, instead of thinking of parents, no matter what gender they are, male and female, male, female and female, that a two-parent home is important no matter who the two parents are. It could be grandma and daddy. Like, they don't, like, these programs only address a certain type of family. And I think that's a problem of how the society is just set up. Everything is genderized. Like, this is a woman's job. that is a man's job, and instead of this is a job, who's gonna take it? And like, this is your responsibility. Just be responsible. It doesn't matter if you're male or female. I don't think WIC, which stands for Women, Infants, and Children, should just be just for women. It should also include men who are taking care of their children.
That's funny. I didn't actually know what WIC stood for until now.
Oh yeah, I actually volunteered at one point in the WIC program, and it was Women, Infant, and Children. And I was like, I always wondered what that meant.
Yeah.
Like, they should just spell it out. But that's actually what the program is for. And I mean, and it's not for everyone. If your income is too high, you cannot use the program. And I think that, yeah, if you make over, I think, $55,000 a year, you're not eligible unless you have been put on temporary disability with your job, which I think is stupid. To me, it's like, it's a Women, Infant, Children program. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, or if you can afford it and you can't afford it. If you need the service and you reach out for it, it should be available. But it's not. So.
And on that one, I'm just gonna interject on that as someone who also works for a government agency. When it comes down to the things that the government is willing to spend money on, and then the things that governments are not willing to spend money on, like paper. I mean, it sounds like something small, but the amount of paper that gets wasted that could have been going to things like, I don't know, feeding kids. But I digress. Again, these are issues that we could probably stand to discuss on a whole nother podcast. But I wanted to go back to something else that you mentioned, Crystal, because when I look at all of the situation, the whole situation, it's almost as if they're setting up the whole thing to discourage men from, I guess, being fathers or being, men to their women. And when I say that, I mean, it's like, well, you could live in the house and take care of your children, but if you do, your kid is not going to be entitled to a certain amount of funding. Or, well, we understand that your relationship with your woman didn't work out and that you have this kid. It would be nice if you were to actually step up and, contribute financially. And just to make sure that you do that, depending on how much money you're making, we're just going to take a percentage out of that. And, sucks to be you if you have bills. And also, it might actually behoove you to choose not to work at all. That way, you won't have to worry about having any money taken from you. It's little things like that that I really feel like the whole system is actually setting up or being set up to weaken the family unit just across the board. I'm not even talking just, black people or, just white people, just Latino. I'm talking about across the board, because these are not issues that are unique to minorities. These are issues that are a serious human issue, at least in this country, because I can't speak for anywhere else. In other places, they have things like free healthcare. So their situation is very different, and I can't compare ours to theirs. But it's like, where is the encouragement to, quote unquote, be a man? Where is the incentive? Not necessarily to say that we should be patting guys on the back for doing the right thing. I don't know if we should be patting anybody on the back for doing the right thing. But at the same time, we're definitely patting people on the back when they were doing the wrong thing, and then all of a sudden a coconut drops on their head and they figure out that they should be doing the right thing. They definitely get a pat on the back. They get a hand up. They get whatever it is that they want. People who were doing the right thing from the beginning get absolutely nothing. They get no respect. It's like, well, you were doing what you were supposed to do. Why do we care? It's an absolute lack of anything positive for people who are actually just trying to do the right thing. And especially when it comes to this men's rights issue, it's just, at least in my purview, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, that it's just getting worse. I want to talk about what do we think needs to be improved, or rather, how do we think that the men's rights issue can be improved upon?
Well, I don't know. That's actually a pretty tough question, because first, women will have to realize that in certain areas we are privileged where men are not. Just like how it's hard for white people to know or even accept that their whiteness is a privilege in this country. There are things that women have been privileged to that men aren't allowed to. So, like, the first step would probably be, like, acceptance and, you know, just to admit to ourselves that, yeah, there's some things that are really messed up and it's unfair to men. So, like, I think that would be the first step. And then we can kind of work from there to say, okay, this is how we're going to make it even, because they're people, they're parents, so they should have rights as I would as a parent.
Skye, we haven't heard from you in a minute. What are your thoughts?
Oh, my thoughts. There's so many of them.
Well, share.
Listen, I don't know. For where we should go with men's rights, I think the main issue is that we need to, as has been said, we need to get women to realize that they are privileged in certain ways, but we also need to get men to realize that they need to speak up more about how they aren't always the privileged ones. Because I think part of the issue is that when we're in situations where the man is in a lesser stance, more than likely he automatically feels demasculated and is demasculated, yeah, that's the word, and is less likely to speak up about it, because he'll either become more emasculated. Thank you. He either becomes more aggressive to try and get his masculinity back, or he stays submissive and ignores that he ever had any kind of problem and pretends like it's nothing. A man who fights back, when his rights are taken from him, when his rights are stepped on by the greater rights of a woman in a situation, pretty much doesn't have a recourse. And even when they try to fight, they don't fight actively and speak out about how, hey, yes, we're getting a divorce, but I want the chance to have my kids. Or, yes, we're not married, but it's still my child. Yes, I have a kid, and I am a man, but I still need some sort of assistance. They don't do that. They get either aggressive or we just pretend like there is no issue and move on meekly and all of that stuff.
You know, it's funny that you... okay, it's not funny. This is actually really serious. When you talk about being emasculated, I know what the word means. I just don't feel like it should really exist anymore, because I think, especially in today's world and in the climate that we have now, we should be in a place where a man's security in his masculinity is not dependent on something someone else said. I mean, I touched on it earlier, and I guess nobody disagreed with me. So I feel pretty comfortable saying that, you know what, your masculinity should not be determined by what someone else thinks. Should not be determined by what someone else says. It should not be determined by, you know, I don't know, the car you drive or how much money you make or whatever. It should be determined by how you act and what you do and how you feel about yourself. When we actually allow other people to demean us in any interaction, all it ever really does is it just serves to take us to a low place. And I'm not necessarily saying that, you know, we should all just, you know, we are human, hear us roar, or whatever the case is, or that we should just be ignoring each other or anything like that. What I am saying, on the other hand, is that sometimes, at some point, we do need to acknowledge the fact that how we allow other people to define us as human beings, especially, you know, people throwing on the labels of manly or womanly or feminine versus masculine. These labels have done nothing for us. They've done nothing positive for us anyway. They've just served as ways to separate and contribute to the deterioration of our society. Again, that's my opinion, and I am going to stick with it. But that's just, when I hear people talking about other people emasculating somebody or them or whatever, I'm just like, you know, self-esteem, that usually comes from self. Just saying. But again, I digress.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not going to get into it now because I have really in-depth opinions on whether masculinity and femininity even exist or should be brought up at all. But we do need to get past the point where we are judging who we are based off of other people's and the standards of society, and because it doesn't do us any good to judge ourselves based off of society who does not necessarily view anybody in a accurate light, or doesn't view anybody who's not the norm, the social norm. Because, you know, even with women or anything else, you have your stereotypes that exist that are what people view you as when they first see you. And we need to get past the point where we view people using those at all. But that's life.
And reality bites. That was the subject of my last blog, actually. I want to hear from the rest of my panel on this, because I think it's a worthy thing to bring up. So I want to know about who taught you what manhood was or is? Who taught you the definition of what a man is?
Well, oops.
I would say that, like, my father taught me what to look for with men, or what a man should or shouldn't be. And my dad is pretty macho, so very stereotypical macho man, doesn't really show his emotions, aggressive. Tells me that all men, want is sex, and just I grew up with these ideas. It really took me deconstructing my ideas of what a man is for me to get to this point in my life where I can see. I don't want to say I have never seen men as individuals, but when your father is teaching you this, it really kind of puts men in this light that they're just these, beings that are only there to fulfill their own desires with you, and that their masculinity is shaped by what they can get out of you instead of what they can be for you outside of just providing for the home and everything, or like my dad being the provider, that is his duty to be a provider. But when it comes to emotional development and relationship, that's not a requirement. And I doubt he feels that way now, but growing up, I definitely feel like his role as a provider was a lot more emphasized than the emotional relationship. That's something that has always been left up to mothers in general, I feel. I think that answers the question.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does. I think Chris was about to say something. Male Chris?
Yes. Well, my father taught me some things, and he basically taught me, you basically don't cry in front of other people, don't really show emotion, just be strong, work through everything, provide for your family. Even though he left when I was in 11th grade, but, that's what I'm doing now. Make sure I'm taking care of my family and won't leave no matter what happens. And it just took me a long time to realize just being a man is doing the right thing, at least to myself. Just means doing the right thing and doing what's necessary to take care of your family and take care of the people around you. And I think that's the most important thing about being a man, but he influenced me, and I took some of his bad habits about being a man. I overwork myself no matter what. I don't ask for help, and I don't really talk about my emotions, even though I really kind of should talk to them with my girlfriend or whatever, but I don't do that. I really should, but I just hold it all in, and that's what I learned from him, and those are some of the bad habits I learned.
Lady Chris?
Well, okay, so I'm going to say I learned from TV. And I'm going to say I learned from TV because I wasn't, really gendered as a kid, meaning that I'm the oldest of 3 girls. I have an older half-brother, but we weren't taught to be different. All the rules were the same for all of us. My dad, it's not like I didn't grow up with a 2-person household, my mom and my dad there, but my dad didn't say, oh, this is what a girl is supposed to do, or this is what a boy is supposed to do. Oh, you're a girl. It was really like, he would be like, he'll say things like, men don't believe the tears of a woman, so don't ever let anyone see you cry. You need to be tough. You need to be strong. So I was only taught strength and toughness. So I just thought that's just how everyone is supposed to be, strong and tough. So, learning about masculinity, I really just learned that stuff from TV. more so than anything, because if I told my dad I want to do something, or Dad, I want a G.I. Joe, like I don't want a Barbie, he'd be like, okay, let's go get a G.I. Joe. Like, it wasn't something that's not a toy for a little girl. You're supposed to play with dolls. It was just like, whatever, that's what you want to play with, that's what we're going to get. You want a fire truck, we'll get a fire truck. You want to be a cop, that's what you'll be. You want to be president, that's what you'll be. It didn't matter. Like, it was just be strong and be tough. It didn't matter if you were a girl or a boy, or, you know, we didn't talk about feelings in my house. We weren't encouraged to cry. So it was just like, you know, I didn't learn about men until I like literally just watching TV, and it's just like, oh, really? Or why is she crying? What's wrong with her? So that was kind of how I learned about
masculinity versus femininity. Okay.
Yeah, just TV.
What about you, Skye?
Yeah, this is really a hard question for me because I don't really think of masculinity and femininity. So I've never really thought that way. As a kid, I played with dolls and Tonka trucks, depending on my mood or who I was with. And I mean, I've had my uncle and other male family members who be like, don't do that, that's girly, don't do that, it'll be weak and all that shit. But I don't pay attention to I've never paid attention to the really biased opinions of anybody. My mom has been one of the strongest people I've ever known. So if I'm thinking of strength, I don't usually think of a man. I usually think of my mother. She's gone through more shit than most men have gone through and is still raising 3 kids on her own. So, like, when I think of being a man, I never think of being a man because it's one of those things that never occurred to me. I think of being a person. You should be a good person. You should do what makes you happy and what you are interested in. But at the end of the day, you have to find a way to make sure that you are doing good for yourself and other people. I don't have a strong opinion on being a man because, I mean, I have a penis and I think of myself as a guy, but that's about as much thought I've ever given to masculinity.
You know, I'm glad you brought it there because that is exactly, but that's who taught me. My mom taught me about what a man was, not necessarily by saying, "Oh, look, Shay, that's a man right there," but by actually playing the role. I guess she was, and more often than not, she was both mother and father because she had both myself and my brother to raise, and she had to make sure that she was doing her best to raise a good man and a good woman, and not necessarily in terms of gender roles, but in terms of being able to understand that we have to live in the world that we have today, not necessarily the world that we want tomorrow. And that if we should get the world that we want tomorrow, we should be able to get along in that world too. That was one of those important lessons that I had to grow into because it was really hard understanding why it is that my mother was like really drilling the feminist ideals into my head as a kid. Why she was really making sure that I understood about politics and why it is that I had an understanding and an appreciation for the sciences and math and reading and things like that, because these were things that people were always trying to push on boys or men. And she wanted to make sure that I could make it in both the world that we have today and the world that she hoped would come once I got, to a proper age, which is where we are going to go to a break, because this brings us to our last topic, or our question. And I'm going to go into a little depth in this when we get back from the break. But really the question that I want everybody to be thinking about is, how has feminism ruined it for us all? And I mean, how has feminism taken a good thing and really turned it into an absolute nightmare? So hopefully you'll come back and actually be able to really go in deep with this one.
Words don't do it justice. Brought to you by 314 Publishing and Imperial Dreams Productions. Don't forget to check out Words Don't Do It Justice.
And we're back. So we're going to talk about feminism having ruined the whole thing for us all. I want to get into the history part, because just like with the blog where I write, history is kind of important when it comes to understanding what all this is about. Historically speaking, and we've touched on it a couple times, women were property. Women were not completely human. Women weren't allowed to do a lot of things like read and write. Women were just not. And that is a big deal. However, now that we are, there are certain things that have completely fallen by the wayside. Now that we are in the workplace and, you know, basically running shit, things like family values have completely fallen apart. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's just because of women. I'm saying that people's perception of what it is that we do and who it is that we're supposed to be, it hasn't changed with the times. We haven't properly evolved with what it is that we were supposed to be evolving into. We haven't caught up with the fact that, okay, well, since women are also able to do these things, that means that men are also able and also have the right to do these things. Yes, men are supposed to be equal partners in the raising of children. Men are supposed to be equal partners in the workplace. And I say equal partners, and I mean equal partners, because in the workplace, we don't make on a percentage basis the same that a man in our same position makes. We don't, or rather earns, because earning is a big deal too. There are assumptions that are still being made about a woman's worth in politics. I mean, the things that are being said about Hillary Clinton right now, as she supposedly still contemplates whether or not she's going to run for president, are still being argued in terms of her womanhood, whether she's woman enough or whether she's man enough. The arguments that are being made in terms of reproductive rights and these things, they're so important, but at the same time, we are completely negating the other things that are also important, like who is educating the children when they get home from school? Who's taking care of them? Usually it's neither one of the actual parents, because both parents, more often than not, are both out at work. So we have two generations of kids who at this point have not been properly raised, aside from what TV has to say. And then we wonder why it is that basically our country is turning to shit. because our generations are being less and less and less cared for, less educated, less everything, less socialized. We barely even know how to interact with each other anymore, because most of what we do is at an arm's length. We don't come close anymore because we're not being taught how to. We go to school. We might learn reading, writing, and arithmetic, but we're not. We come home, we don't have mom or dad there necessarily to say, do your homework. We don't have these people, a community of people anymore to say, get home before the street lights come on. We don't have that anymore because the whole family system, the whole community system has deteriorated into nothingness ever since, one, children were no longer allowed to work. I wrote a blog on that too. And two, women entered the workplace also. Once those two things happened, it was like the family unit was not even secondary as a priority. The only thing that has been important in our lives as people in this country, because again, I can't speak for other places, has been our ability to acquire and purchase things. That's all that has mattered ever since. It has ruined things, not necessarily in that, we're going to have a fempocalypse and everything is going to fall apart, but in the fact that things are already falling apart and there's no one there or available to pick things back up anymore. Men have no reason to pick it up, and women have every reason to do it, but no time to get it done because we have to do all these things that we fought for the right to do in the first place. There's no equity going on anymore. This is what my issue is. I want people to think about the decisions that we are making in terms of how we treat each other. Not just as I am woman or you are man or that's a child and that's a dog and that person's gay, this person's black, Chinese, Hispanic. I want to talk about how it is that we treat each other now that we have a global economy, now that we have women in the workplace, now that we have children who are not being raised by parents anymore, now that we have reality TV that is doing nothing but melting our brains. I want to talk about how it is that things are deteriorating and what it is that we are ready to do to make things better. Crystal, please.
Okay, you touched on a lot of things, and that could go on to a whole other podcast. But I think something like the one common denominator in that is the economic situation as it currently is. When they first established the minimum wage was enough for a family of 4 with one working person to support that whole family. And now the minimum wage, depending on what city you live in, will depend on how many jobs you need to have at minimum wage to actually support your family. And that is just like in New York, they just had a study that it took 4.5 minimum wage jobs to pay the rent in New York. So we're not even talking about eating, getting clothes, and getting to and from work. We're just talking about paying the rent. So because of that situation, the only thing that's there to raise children now are teachers and TV. If grandma or great grandma is not working, because often or not, the older generation still have to work because their pensions are not enough to economically support them. So they can't even stay home and help their children or grandchildren raise their children because they have to work, because if they don't work, they'll die. So that type of the economic situation is what's creating this this current future. Well, I wouldn't even say situation. It's more like the track that we're heading for the future. And I don't know if anyone saw this movie. It's called Idiocracy. And basically it's where one of the dumbest people of our modern time goes to the future, and he ends up being the smartest person in the world, and he's an idiot. So that's kind of where we're headed. I mean, I was really hoping for the Soylent Green apocalypse, but it seems like we're heading towards like Idiocracy instead of Soylent Green, but we may still get a bit of Soylent Green. So.
You know, that's just, yeah, that's basically where my issue is. The direction that we're going is, it's so obvious. It's starting with the fact that smart is becoming less and less attractive, so to speak. It's so not sexy, and it really doesn't sell. Ignorant, that sells. Ratchet, please, more of that. Or not. Skye?
Yeah. I'm not good at looking towards the future because I have enough issues with the present as it is. But yeah, I see things that are getting better socially. We're somewhat more accepting than we used to be, or at least we put up the air of being more accepting than we used to be. But I agree. Intelligence and thought are nowhere near as important as they could be. Because I know I live in Atlanta, which has one of the worst school systems in all of the country. And the fact that I can take regular courses and get an A in them easily, when these are courses that in another school are just the average course, but for us they're honors courses, is kind of scary to me. Or like my SAT score was on the higher end of average, so I am apparently like I had the highest score in my school, and I was praised in all of these things when my score was the higher end of average. It was an average score. It wasn't like I got a 2,000 or anything. And I just see how a lot of things, you don't hear anybody talking about mental accomplishments anymore. If you hear somebody having an accomplishment, it's because they've done something incredibly stupid and somehow it worked out. I mean, you got Soldier Boy type people coming at random with this just pointless stuff that become famous.
Did you just set my whole podcast on fire by mentioning that name? Is that what you just did? Oh God.
I mean, you get people going up in arms about about Beyonce as a religion. Apparently, she's a deity who's come down to bless us.
Where's my tambourine? Keep going, please.
And it's just like, what happened to being proud of somebody who has actually accomplished something with their mind? People who we have people discovering all sorts of really awesome shit on a regular basis. I mean, we have halfway made synthetic blood. And yet, I have yet to hear anybody talk about that at all, and how great that is, or flying spaghetti monster, or how
I'm a little upset about hearing about the printer the gun printer or whatever. Like, really, is that what we really need to focus on in today's climate?
Of course, the 3D printer was made for nothing but, making guns, and not for the fact that they discovered a way to make a 3D cast that could ultimately improve healing slightly. We don't think about all of these really, when we do get intellectual goods, we use them for guns and things that we don't need. And when you bring up the fact that you need gun control and people actually regulating who has guns instead of giving out AK-47s to little 4-year-olds and dressing them up in pink and shit, I don't know. I don't see things going in a great direction unless we start having serious talks, because we don't talk about gun control, or we don't talk about sex. We don't talk, or if we do talk about sex, we talk about sex just because it's forbidden and naughty to talk about. We don't actually have discussions about rape or sexuality or anything. So we can go in a good direction. We're not, because we aren't talking. We are shaking our asses for I don't even know what, because
14. Oh God, please. I just can't. I can't. I mean, I'm glad you did, but I just can't. Courtney.
Yes, I'm here. Could you restate the question more clearly for me?
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm kind of in and out because I moved today, so I'm still kind of tired.
I understand. Basically, where do you stand? How do you feel? What are your thoughts on how feminism? I don't know if you really got to think about what I was saying before, but when it comes to how we're dealing with things right now and where it is that it seems that we're going, ever since we on the women's end, we've started making that switch into taking up these roles, but at the same time, the rest of society, specifically the male half, hasn't gotten to catch up and isn't being encouraged to do so either. What do you think about that? Where do you think we're heading, or what do you think about where we're heading in those terms?
I think things are just like kind of muddy now because there's a lot of people shouting over each other. I do believe that feminism is in general is being questioned, and not as in like, it's not legitimate or anything, but just questioning what it is and who defines it, and dealing with the extremists, dealing with people who are like women of color issues, which are kind of silent in the larger arena of feminism. How at the intersection of race, how does that affect the different issues that are addressed in feminism? And but overall, like I think that having the conversation is leading in the right direction. It's difficult because it's like we can preach equality all day long, but the world that we live in will never really allow for true equality. And honestly, like I don't believe that. I believe that some of the roles that we have are somewhat necessary. We develop them as a means of survival, and I don't believe that they're completely unnecessary or that they're inherently bad. I just think that it all boils down to us in this modern day where we have the freedom to be to be individuals, to allow others to be however that takes place. Because like sometimes I'll see discussions and people catch a lot of flack for supporting certain certain ideas and, oh my gosh, you would let a man do such and such or say such and such, or you subscribe to these ideas that are, taking away your, autonomy as a woman. And I'm sorry, I'm getting kind of flustered because I'm tired, but I think that we should allow ourselves to be whatever type, whether that's conservative or whether that's more liberal or however you see it. I feel like, people shouldn't be boxed in. And I was having a discussion with someone the other day actually about even, like the whole ratchet idea. And honestly, I kind of cringe when I hear people say ratchet all the time. And I've had to check myself on the use because I feel like it's a dehumanizing term in a sense where, when you point at someone and you say that they're ratchet or someone, especially a woman, you're automatically telling them that they're less than for their behaviors and not understanding where those ideas and behaviors come from. So I see that sometimes too, like, oh my gosh, how can this respectability type thing where like, how can you call yourself a feminist, or how can you say you subscribe to these ideas when you do such and such? And I feel like the problem is because we box ourselves in and we don't allow people to be contradictory. I feel like as humans, we contradict ourselves naturally. Like, I feel like that's just a part of us. And that's a part of what makes us complex. But we feel like, well, if you say that you're this one thing, then you should look, speak, and act like this. And I feel like, that's why now it's just so many different voices going on because everyone's trying to tell the other what it is they should look like and be if they want to be considered, feminist or, even with the whole masculinism. I think, that it may even, play out in that as well. So, that's pretty much how I feel about it.
You know what? I just, when it comes to all this, it, like I said, near and dear to my heart. So I'm just glad we're having a conversation. And Chris, what's your point on it?
My point on feminism and the destruction of the world?
Yeah, that.
Well, I think when it comes to certain things, like the lady was saying on the podcast thing, I think some gender roles are just changing in that on both ends, we all need to step it up, and that it's a possibility that the world could come to an end if things keep going the way they are, and the proper education is not brought to men and women, feminists or whoever. But I think feminism, as long as we keep the extreme people, in the right areas and not making sure that everyone's trying to be on the same page or try to at least be equal, I think we all may be okay. If not, I think we'll all end up in I have seen the movie Idiocracy, and that's not a good place to be. And I just think that overall, that as long as, I'm just going to probably say it again, that we just do the right things. But I don't think that, I think at the end of the day that we will possibly be okay. And I have noticed some things such as on Facebook, if I post something totally negative or kind of ghetto, I'll get tons of likes, comments, and everything. If I post something inspiring, something that's educating people, I get maybe 1 or 2 likes. And it's just amazing how that happens sometimes. I'm just like, wow, I found this interesting. I would think a couple people would find it interesting, but I could post Solange beating up Jay-Z and everybody just wants to laugh and say, oh, yeah, that's cool. But I have hope for the future.
3,000 comments worth of a thread on ridiculosity and nothing said on something actually meaningful.
Yeah. And that's one thing I'm trying to do is mentor people. Actually, I've been trying to mentor people and stuff, but it's been kind of hard only because some kids, they don't want to pay attention. They don't want to do their schoolwork. They don't want to do their homework. They rather play video games and not even actually learn about stuff. But they'll believe anything they say on YouTube about the Illuminati and how the whole world is just, you know, Obama's the Antichrist and all this stuff. And I just find it that this information age is kind of very dangerous, especially if parents aren't definitely trying to teach them or regulate what they watch or supervise what they watch even. And I just hope that our future will be okay.
Your lips to God's ears. There is one. You know what? I think we had a good discussion, and I really appreciate everybody's input on this because, like I said, this is a really important conversation for me because as a woman and as someone who believes in personhood the right way, not that other stuff, I think it is really, really important that we acknowledge the fact that progress isn't always good. And that we actually have to sometimes slow down before we go steaming ahead and look around to see what it is that we are destroying on our way through. I can't begin to express exactly how concerned I am. And I'm not talking in terms of doom and gloom or anything. I'm just saying I'm really concerned for how well we are going to fare as a species, really, because the way how we are going right now, it feels more like a devolution than an evolution. We're not moving forward. We're not doing better. We're living longer, but our insides are melting and cancerous. Like the things that we're doing, that we're not making things better, and that's what we're supposed to be doing. So I want to say thank you, a huge thank you to my panel, Chris, Chris and Chris, male Chris, female Chris, Courtney and Skye. Thank you guys so much for signing up and volunteering to talk about this. Thank you, Matt, the boss man, for always being so super awesome and letting me do this. And thank you, listeners, for sitting through all this and hopefully actually really thinking about where we're going and what we can do to improve. Just going to hand it over to my panel and say goodnight.
Oh, that's for us. Okay, good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Skye.
Good night, everyone. It's been a pleasure talking with you all.
Ditto. Thanks for listening, and peace be with you.